Hello, everyone. My name is Jen Walker Wall. I'm the founder of Work Wonders Careers, and I'm here with my friends Kim and Rayshauna today to talk about imposter syndrome at work. And they are my two go-to people on this topic. So I'm so thrilled that they were able to join me today. If you're not familiar with Work Wonders Careers, we help people land new jobs and thrive at work. And you can visit us at workwonderscareers.com, hop on our mailing list, and hear more about upcoming events like this. And if you are new to these, we like to hop on LinkedIn once a month and bring you helpful and actionable insight to help you move your career forward. And hey, Nicole, okay, good. We're live. People can see. It's always nice when people comment right away. So feel free to let us know in the comments that you're here. Say hello. Let us know where you're watching from, and we'll give everyone a minute or two to join us live. I want to dive in and have our special guests share with us their immense knowledge and insight on imposter syndrome and navigating through it, especially with regard to our personal life. But I just want to say a few words about each of these fantastic people. So Kim is an executive coach who specializes in empowering women and members of underrepresented groups to become more confident, visible, and influential leaders. Prior to coaching, she spent over 10 years in the high-tech industry in a variety of cross-functional leadership roles, and she is an ICF certified coach with a BA in psychology and an MBA. Rayshauna is a public historian and policymaker who is currently affiliated with the Massachusetts chapter of the National Organization for Women, the Cambridge Historical Society, Boston Book Festival, and Mass Cultural Council. She supports research, historic preservation, and economic development efforts in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and her hometown, Chicago. Previously, she has created content for Boston's Museum of African American History, helped run new initiatives at Harvard University, and mapped 400 years of African American history as a member of the Tufts University Center for the Study of Race and Democracy research team. So yeah, these are not two random people. These are like highly qualified, thoughtful, brilliant people. I just want to say hi to Pam, Renee, someone whose name I can't quite see on here, but hi, Michelle. Hi, Beth. I'm so thrilled that people are watching because I think they're going to get so much out of this. So let's dive right in. I was really excited. So first, I think people should know who are watching this. Kim and Rayshauna and I have been on panels about this before. So if you see us getting a little punch drunk, it's just because we're exceptionally comfortable together. We're really excited to be together, and we haven't actually all seen each other's faces in quite some time. So we're really happy to be here. I'll speak on behalf of all three of us. We're very happy to be here. One of the reasons I was excited to bring the two of you together is because I think you both have like a complex and nuanced understanding of what many people refer to as imposter syndrome. And so I'd love to just, start, and maybe I'll start with Kim and then we'll go to Rayshauna. How do you define imposter syndrome, and what are some signs that we may be experiencing this?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jen. I am very excited to be here today. So imposter syndrome, in my mind, is really that sense that we have that we're not as capable as other people think we are. So we've got all of these feelings of inadequacy, even though to the outside world, things may be going really well. Maybe we're getting positive feedback. We've had a track record of success, but inside we feel like a fraud. And it's only a matter of time before someone figures out that we aren't who they think we are. We can't really do this job. And I think one of the questions that a lot of us struggle with or grapple with or ask ourselves when we are struggling with imposter syndrome is, who am I to? I think that's a very good indicator of imposter syndrome is, who am I to share this idea, right? Who am I to step into this leadership role? So if you find yourself asking a variation of that question, it's a good signal that you may be struggling with imposter syndrome.
Kim, that's so great and so concise. I can tell I invited the right people because I would still be rambling my thoughts here. Rayshauna, how about you? Like, how do you think of imposter syndrome, and what are some signs that you want people to potentially recognize?
Let's see. I'm like, challenge accepted. Concise. No, I'll put it this way. My experience with imposter syndrome felt like a deep and abiding investment in a story that was not serving me, plus all the related actions, be it self-sabotage, be it unhealthy routines and patterns that I used to call coping mechanisms, right? That were really induced or necessitated by the panic associated with anxiety, which was stemming from the imposter syndrome. Um, so yeah, those are some of the things that I look for. Am I constantly looking outside of myself for language for who I am? I happen to believe, I'm a historian and a policymaker. I believe that everybody has dignity. And so I believe that if imposter syndrome, or excuse me, I believe that if you constantly find yourself um, thinking, speaking, and operating in ways that impugn your own dignity, um, number one, I think that that's like also socially influenced and reinforced. But also, like imposter syndrome, at least my interpretation of it, holds that society plays way more of a factor, and our socialization specifically, including and especially our families, play way more of a factor than I think we like to admit, because we're very professional with our resumes and our angel list profiles. We don't necessarily want to admit that we're a middle child that was never listened to. Now, I'm an only child, so I'm not talking about myself, but I'm just saying, just putting that out there. I'll stop there for now.
Well, I mean, I think that you both kind of like touched on this piece, right? That like for so long we thought of imposter syndrome as like individual feelings. And I think partly like what I'm hearing is it's much deeper and more complex than that. And I think there's kind of a growing understanding that this has a lot to do with racism and sexism and childhood trauma, right? There's like many layers here. Organizational trauma at work, right? Organizational dynamics, power dynamics in the workplace. So I guess just to kind of start unpacking this, let's talk about those a little bit more. Like, what do you see as the major contributors, right? You just named some of them. So maybe we can dive in a little more deeply, and I'll give everyone permission to be less concise and just share some candid insights. Rayshauna, do you want to take it off here?
Let's see. I'd like to meditate on my answer a little bit longer. Would you mind going first?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So I'll share a story, an observation that I made about a year or two ago, where I was talking to probably 3 or 4 women over the course of a week or two, where they all said essentially the same thing, which was some variation of, it's like I go into these meetings and I freeze. I can't form a coherent thought. I can't articulate what I want to say. I sound like an idiot, something like that. And I finally got off the last of those calls and this light bulb went off. And I thought, these are really talented, brilliant women. They don't second guess themselves in this way when they're around people they trust. They don't do this when they're with their friends and family. This is not about them. This is about the environment that they're in. When they step into those rooms, it's because they don't feel safe, that they have this kind of a reaction. So I think so much of what we're talking about boils down to a lack of psychological safety and a lack of feeling welcome and included in the work environment.
Yeah. Ooh, you brought me back to a few rooms that I was in where I was like, I no one knows my resume better than I do. Why can I not? Specifically being in the Harvard Club of New York's Manhattan location for this very fancy event with Harvard Business School, where the topic was Black women at work. And I'm pretty sure I was the only Black woman in the building that was not cleaning the building. And so when I tell you that I know a little bit about those spaces where it's like, why can I not draw upon, and not even to be arrogant about it, because I believe that just like that dignity, everyone has this vast pool of insight, experiences, nuance, discernment, right? Everyone has a rich body of experiences of their own that they can draw from. And so when imposter syndrome gets its claws into us, it's almost blasphemous to me, because it's like, oh God, not only is this person plagued with this really rough, deeply entrenched mode of thought that's like tearing them up, we as a society, we fail to benefit from that unique thing that person could have otherwise contributed. Like everybody's losing out, and I don't like this. And so zooming out for me, I'm a Black woman with no college degree from the South Side of Chicago. I've, raised by a single parent who has a disability. Like there are so many ways that societal messaging about who I was supposed to be that was set in place before I even got here in 1986, the weight of cultural inheritance is heavy. And I'm not just saying this as somebody that created an imposter syndrome framework. I designed the framework for an individual to walk through, but I knew that I needed, in those 8 steps, I needed to include a column about socialization. I straight up ask people, how have you been socialized in ways that don't serve or honor you? And just like our hypothetical middle child, there are groups of people that have language for being subaltern, right? I was raised, on the south side of Chicago in the 1980s and 90s, but I was raised in a multi-generational household with my maternal grandparents who sharecropped in Mississippi in the 40s and 50s. And because of my mom's disability and because of asset limits set in place by the federal government, which are all part of this network of barriers that inform how I go to work. If I know for a fact that my mother's quality and length of her life, it's hinges in a major way on what professional and financial choices I make, that directly informs how I show up at work. It directly informs how much give I have, how likely I am to quit a job before I found a new one, right? I was raised again by people who sharecropped. I don't even buy something unless I can afford it 3 times over. The way you think is directly informed by how you've been socialized inside and out of your home. So I'm always asking people, what stories about value did you inherit? And what are the gaps? And where did you make assumptions based on need, where life might be inviting you to expand a little bit? And I'm preaching to myself, so I will stop here.
No,
Have you ever just accidentally preached to yourself?
that's what we do here, right? I mean, I think that's partly how some of us come to spend so much time thinking about these phenomena, is that we become a little more intimate than we might like, through our own experiences here. I'm just taking a look at the comment section. Pamela is taking exquisite notes. I'm going to come back here because she's quoting people. I love it. And I actually saw a good question here. Let me see if I can find it. I think it was Trisha's question, which is so how do we think about imposter syndrome as being different than being insecure? Or do we think about it as different than being insecure?
I think it's a very good question. So imposter syndrome differs from other forms of, confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, in that it's really tied to our competence. It's not something that we generally feel in situations outside of the workplace, or situations that sort of test our competence and our sense of how we're showing up in that way. So we can be insecure in a number of different settings, like a personal relationship, but we're not likely to experience imposter syndrome in a more personal type of relationship. So I think insecurity is associated with imposter syndrome, but they're different things.
Yeah. Rayshauna, do you have a take on that?
I sure do. I was chomping at the bit to unmute myself. I was like, how can I do this seamlessly with hot tea in one hand? I always like to bring up certain just core attributes, core traits, core values. I like to say them out loud because we live, and this is not me being like, oh, we live in an era of snowflakes, but I do care about language. I care about rich, robust language that gets right at what we're trying to talk about. And so I'm not saying that I hate the word woke. I'm saying that I would much prefer us, for us to have conversations like, okay, do you have character? Do you have integrity? Do you have temerity? Are you decent? Are you kind? Do you ask incisive questions? I'm basically, the pandemic has stripped away my appetite for anything false. I don't know about anyone at home who's tuning in from somewhere else. And so that's my lead up to saying, folks often ask me, Rayshauna, how can I tell the difference between imposter syndrome and what I legitimately don't know? And I'm like, honestly, that's where my bedrock values like self-awareness and discernment come in. I operate with a sense of wild and boundless curiosity. I understand that I'm a city kid, so I understand that you can't be open to everything. And so I sharpen and constantly hone my discernment. I intentionally agitate my worldview by exposing myself to people intentionally and in interpersonally and culturally appropriate ways, right? Like I might conduct a house of worship hop when I moved to Massachusetts to learn more about the theological traditions I didn't have access to in my segregated neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, right? I wanted more, even though I'm not necessarily a religious person, I wanted more language and understanding for how people conceived of morality, ethics, and how they chose to move through the world, so I could better understand all the gaps between what they say and how they act, right? And so I wholeheartedly believe that if one is equipped with the courage and the temerity to look oneself in the mirror, I can't lie to myself about what I don't know. I don't. So I suppose this is my long way of saying I sort of flip it on its side. I don't want to set myself up for any imposter syndrome by claiming to know or understand something that I don't. And so for me, humility, discernment, and a constant appetite, not so that I can be perfect or appear to have a monopoly on information, but just so that I can say I rose to the occasion of my circumstances. I was hungry for language, hungry for understanding, and so I can move through the world with integrity and with pride. Maybe this is for all the astrology kids at home. Maybe this is my Mars and Capricorn showing up. I want to do my job. I want to do it well. And I want it to have a meaningful and lasting positive impact on the folks that cross paths with it. And in order for me to do that, I need to be the best possible steward of the truth. And the truth is sometimes I don't know everything. And so insecurity, I never wanted to get that deep where I'm so agitated that I can't perform, but a healthy sense of self-awareness. And I understand what I'm asking because my family's been in what became the United States for a few centuries. So I know how difficult it can be to be self-aware. It's been socialized out of me too. But I definitely think it's important. And I don't think we talk about it enough.
So the first thing I want to say is I believe I have cultivated an audience of very astrologically friendly people who will appreciate such references. And the second thing I just want to comment on, and Kim, I'm curious if this resonates with you. I see this manifest when I am working with people. I'm looking at their resume. I'm asking them to tell me about things that they did. And sometimes there is that like freeze response, or there's like a real lack of clarity over what their contributions actually are. That's pretty astounding to me because of the depth and the frequency at which I see it. And I'm with you, Rayshauna, because one of my core values is integrity. And I use that word with a lot of intention because I think that I agree, like it's about being a steward of the truth and knowing who you are and allowing other people to know who you are, regardless of how interested they may be in perhaps knowing parts of you. And so it's really fascinating to me when I ask people to talk about the impact that they have or the contributions they make, how difficult it is for people to articulate it. And I feel like that's because there's like a dichotomy between those, like a very like a polarization between those of us who are, hyping ourselves up on LinkedIn, right? There's like the hardcore hustle culture, like rise and grind crowd. And then there's like the rest of us. And sort of it's like, what is the way to do this with integrity? Or how can I probe with curiosity? I think that kind of language and approach, at least in my experience, is like much harder to find. It doesn't lend itself well to the fast-paced world of like LinkedIn, social media, and those sorts of things. So I just want to kind of give my 2 snaps for that. I see we have Sean Fleming says, you're preaching to all of us. So we're all listening. When Michelle comments, like thinking about the accuracy of language. Yeah, I think this is so important. Just in terms, for many, many reasons. And one of the reasons like I came to this work coming from a nonprofit background is like, I was so horrified at the lack of risk I saw people taking over things that really mattered a lot. I'm sure Michelle is kind of familiar with this. And so I do have a strong value around, being brave at work. And my own family story is that I was always an agitator. So like this tracks for me and I have socialization in the right direction for this work, I think. But I'm curious to hear from both of you, like, what do you see as like, what are some ways that people can get curious and creative if they're at the beginning of their journey in sort of navigating through some of this, imposter syndrome?
So I want to comment a little bit on what you were just talking about too, in terms of us not being able to articulate our accomplishments. And I think this is helpful for people who are early in your career, because I think the better you understand what's likely to come up, the more you can anticipate and manage it. once it hits you.
Yeah.
So for me, I often think about imposter syndrome as a general fear response. Like our bodies are hardwired, our brains are hardwired to always be on the lookout for something that's a threat. And so we are in constant survival mode. And anytime we don't know something, or anytime that we are put into a situation where there's uncertainty or we feel there's a risk there, our brains perceive that as a threat. And there's the potential that we're going to go into fight or flight mode. So in situations like I described earlier of, it's like I can't form a coherent thought, it's because I'm in fight or flight mode. My body has determined that this is a threat. And social comparison is a big part of how we're wired as well. So we're always looking at other people and we're comparing ourselves, and we're always comparing ourselves to the things that they do that we don't do, but we never see ourselves as special. Anything that we do is like, oh yeah, but that's no big deal. That's easy. Anybody can do that. But when we look around, there's always going to be someone who's smarter than us. There's always going to be someone who's further along in their career, somebody who has more experience than we do. And I think because of the nature of the work that we do today versus maybe years ago when it was, maybe more like assembly line work where you configured one thing by yourself, or you could very easily quantify and explain what you do, that's different from today where we're all kind of collaborating in a way where it's difficult to isolate our unique contribution. And so we get stuck in this language of we versus I. And it's hard for us to say with authority, oh, I'm responsible for this, or these are my accomplishments, because we don't want to overstate. And so I think part of this too comes down to the idea that we're not taking stock for the most part in what's going well. We're noticing and marking all of the negatives along the way, like all the things that aren't working and all the things that we don't know. But when things are going well, we're not stopping and celebrating like, ooh, I solved this problem, or ooh, I learned this new skill. And so when we get to where we're going, it feels like a fluke. Like, how did I get here? And if we had been intentional and conscious about all those different steps along the way, we would recognize that this is just the next step on the journey. So I think for those of you who are just starting, just getting out there, know that this is happening, and it's just a very natural human response to ambiguity and uncertainty. But it's not truth. That message, that narrative that we carry around with us is not a fact. It's an opportunity, like you said, about getting curious. Anytime, as somebody who has struggled with anxiety my whole life, anytime I get anxious about something, anytime I hear that inner critic talking, I will pause and I'll say, what's this really about? What am I really afraid of here? And that's the curiosity piece, right? And then I can start to take action. Okay, I'm afraid that I don't know enough about what the conversation I'm stepping into. So what can I do about that? Maybe I can have a conversation with someone ahead of time. Maybe I could bring someone else into the room with me. I can take control of the situation, but if it's all happening kind of under the surface and it's all emotionally driven, there's nothing you can do with it.
Yeah. Thanks, Kim. Rayshauna, do you have any tips for people at the beginning of their journey? Any beginner tips here for those of us who aren't feeling super brave, but want to start kind of building the confidence back up and having a clearer sense of who we are and what we offer?
For sure, and I'm glad that that the ambulance driving down my street is actually gone. So I'm on here. I'm going to take a slice from my imposter syndrome framework, and it's the column where I invite people to sort of travel in time in their minds. This is going to sound woo-woo, it's going to sound fruit, but I honestly believe that it's work that reintroduces you to the most tender version of yourself. And I think that in a society like this one, that is revolutionary. I know that we're talking about work. I know that we're talking about performance. I know that we're talking about our values and our orientation toward them and other people in the world. I also believe that we're talking about our orientations toward ourselves over time, throughout time. And so during my imposter syndrome framework workshops, that's hard to say out loud, I invite people, I say, hey, what would talk to your 5-year-old self, and then either travel in time and tack on 10 years to however old you are now, and see what breadcrumbs your future self might be inclined to lovingly leave you. And that's not just like a nifty metaphorical exercise. By asking you to be in conversation or in communion with your 5-year-old self, I'm asking you to potentially access a part of you that you've been socialized out of. Where is your boundless curiosity, right? Is it imposter syndrome? Are you struggling with a sense of apathy towards your work because you truly don't care about it, right? And because you've been so desensitized to authenticity and healthy desire, whether it's by way of having to pay bills and just get through the month or get through the year, whether it's a global pandemic that's worse than the one in 1918 that's just putting stressors on every facet of society. I believe that we live in a society that will socialize you out of yourself just to sell you tickets back in. And I think that's reprehensible. So when I'm asking you to talk to your 5-year-old self, I'm asking you to go to the fountain of your own youth and find your definitive language for your own hope, for your own vision, for your own life. And I understand that kids don't know everything. There's a reason why we've never had a 5-year-old president. But look at the presidents that we have had. And when I'm asking you to travel into the future, and this is where I'm about to reintroduce or specifically like call out things like white supremacy and racism and all these isms and phobias that plague our lives. I get that we all have these different facets of identity, and it's those rich differences that afford us all different language. And so here's some language I have that's born out of lived experience. How do I say this? I am, like I've mentioned before, I'm from the south side of Chicago, and I have ancestral roots in the Mississippi Delta, where my family's been for the last couple of centuries. When we talk about cultural inheritance around labor, around work, I am speaking as someone who's a literal descendant of enslaved people and sharecroppers. As a historian and a policymaker, it's incumbent upon me, it's part of my moral imperative and social responsibility to talk about the way things were so that we can have a better understanding of how we behave, why, in hopes of engineering potentially a better future if we can imagine one, if we have the heart to imagine one. And so when I'm inviting people, when I'm asking people to think into the future, I'm doing this as someone who grew up in a place where people did not expect to live beyond 26. And that's because they were Black in Chicago or they were trans and kicked out of their families. Like, there are real world material condition issues that impact what we value, how we move through the world, what we cherish, and what risks we're willing to take. So yeah, I'm inviting you to be radical by looking into the past and into the future, so that you can hopefully see what you might have sacrificed.
Yeah, I mean, part of what you're sharing is reminding me of like how like a professionally cultivated sense of self is like something we're all encouraged to have. I mean, that's essentially what LinkedIn is, right? Otherwise, Instagram would work for that. But we're all here on LinkedIn sort of cultivating a professional self. And like, while there might be some benefit to like, you know, having a way to think of yourself professionally, it also reminds me that kind of the reality is that comes from kind of disowning other parts of ourself, like suspending other parts of ourself in order to quote unquote show up professionally, and how that's a value of capitalism, it's a value of white supremacy, but how well does that actually serve those of us who show up in a myriad of ways on a daily basis? And I see a lot more resistance to that post-pandemic. I mean, I think, Rayshauna, to your point, we're all a little tired of we're all a little tired of the pretense, cutting right to the chase. I'm 100% with you on that. I do see another question here from Sean, so let me pull this up. Do you feel that one's ability to accurately break down who they are, what they have accomplished, and what they represent is more greatly driven by competition with other folks and their ability or inability to see themselves as on the same level with other candidates or job seekers? That's a really fascinating question. Kim, do you want to, I'm curious, you probably work with job seekers, so just.
Yeah, I do to some extent, Sean. I think that we are naturally inclined to compare ourselves to others. And so one of the things I hear a lot when I talk to women in particular about this idea of claiming strengths, of saying, what are your greatest strengths in an interview or otherwise, is this second guessing that says, well, I think I'm good at this, but would other people say I'm good at this? And am I as good as somebody else, or am I better? And so it's all in relationship to how other people perceive you and how much, how you measure up to the people around you. So I think it's really hard, because when we have to put pen to paper and say, these are my accomplishments, there's always that little voice that says, yeah, but are you overstating that? Right? Is that how other people think? And so it knocks us, it keeps knocking us down. And there's, I think, noble humility. I think that self-awareness and humility are noble traits that we should all aspire to have more of. But then there's the outright sort of selling ourselves short because we can't embrace the fact that we have strengths. It just doesn't feel good to talk about ourselves in those ways.
Yeah, there's another question here that I saw.
Rayshauna,
did you want to? No, go ahead. Yes, I'm scrolling.
I will be so quick. I promise. And this is because this is something I've experienced, and it got on my nerves so much that I have to say this out loud. I signed an NDA, so I can't cut too close to the grain. So I will say this. I wholeheartedly co-sign what you just shared, Kim. I would also like to add, by zooming out, that there have been a number of interviews where I've participated as the job seeker, where I literally combed through my most recent job description and tried my best to accurately represent what I had been tasked to do. Because I do not lie. My resume is too impressive for me to be out here lying. I was like, I will not impugn my own name and my own sweat. That said, it was almost impossible for me to interview with any sense of pride, authority, within reason, as it related to my own specific role, because my organization was in a constant state of flux, chaos. The internal teams did not talk to each other. We were like onboarding people and offboarding people constantly. I was one of the newest hires, and I was the one creating these systems for how we conduct ourselves as an organization. Meanwhile, I hadn't even been properly trained. I'm like, I think it's laughable when certain institutions expect for us to have a sense of pride, authority, and to be able to talk with confidence about what we accomplish, when I don't want to say 9 times out of 10, but for a lot of employees, it's like we are disconnected from the ultimate end of our work. We have very little to no autonomy over, when it's due, how it's designed. It always baffled me how, because I'm mission driven, almost every organization I've ever worked for has had a very clear spelled out mission on the website, and only on the website. And so, yeah, I can try as hard as I want to accurately represent what I've been tasked to do and what I attempted to do, but without being tethered to the ends of that labor, or it's just while also experiencing that workplace harm. It's like I'm already emotionally and cognitively divorced from this work that was supposed to be mission driven, because the organization does not know what it's going to do. So I have no context for how appropriate, fitting, and quality my contribution is. Yeah.
Yeah, I see. This is also part of what I think when I say, like, tell me about this, which seems like a simple, straightforward question, but is actually really complex, right? Because I think as employees, we're super aware of how dysfunctional some of our workplaces are, right? And so the organization's inability to maintain sense of integrity for itself, or to really pursue and achieve the outcomes that it's intended to, that is something I see people internalize quite a bit. And so one question I like to ask is like, tell me how you have operated in this environment. Like, what have you resisted? How have you stepped up? Like, have you cognitively divorced yourself? Like, that's a good solution too. Sometimes we need more of that. Like, but I'm always really fascinated with how people respond to these organizational challenges, because it's almost always with kindness, with compassion for people around them. I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but some of the closest work friends and camaraderie have happened in like the most toxic job settings. Mm-hmm. So it's like, I think people find each other sometimes in these workplaces. So I do think it makes it like so difficult. So if you are someone who struggles, and actually this is the question that I wanted to pull up from Pamela, like, it's so hard to actually articulate anything about you, because I think we're so, inundated with our organization. So Pamela's question here is, any recommendations for personal branding on LinkedIn, such as the About section, for how to reconcile the need to self-promote and our desire to be true to ourselves? Some of my About drafts feel cold and impersonal, very much like an imposter, antithetical to who I am in real life. Do either of you want to have any thoughts on this?
Can I share a story? I want to share a little
Yeah.
bit of my own personal experience with imposter syndrome that might get at this a little bit. So I joined a tech company without any kind of a technical background at all. I have a psychology degree, never intended to go into corporate America, and I stumbled into it. And I got promoted. I was really good at the soft skills. So I got promoted really quickly. And I ended up in this group where I was surrounded by engineers and product managers and people who it felt to me like were speaking a foreign language. And I would sit in these meetings and people would start talking. And I felt so in over my head. And I remember thinking, I am one question away from this whole house of cards collapsing. Everyone's going to find out. I have no business being in this room. I don't know what I'm doing. And I can remember thinking, I have to solve this problem. And the only way I knew how was to just consume as much information as possible. And I thought, I just need to catch up to the other people in this room, right? So these are people who had so many years of experience. These are people who had degrees and things that I was never going to have. And I remember thinking, like, I'll just go get a master's in software engineering. That's simple enough. And it took 3 courses before I realized that's not what I was cut out to do. And so I actually ended up talking with our executive vice president, and he was the head of engineering, and we went to the same university. And I sat down with him and I said, you know what? Sometimes I feel a little bit in over my head in these situations. Do you think I should get an engineering degree if I want to advance in the company? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, no, don't get an engineering degree. You're surrounded by engineers. If you need to have a technical conversation, bring an engineer into the room with you. He said, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know what you don't know and find people with those skills. And what it made me realize was 2 things. Number 1 was nowhere in my resume, nowhere in my interview, nowhere in any conversation that I've ever had have I ever presented myself as having technical skills. I'm not lying to anybody. And yet they invite me to the meeting anyway. There must be a reason why they're including me. The second thing I thought was, oh my God, I'm spending so much time comparing myself to Bob from engineering who has 20 years of experience I'll never have and frankly don't ever want. What am I not doing? Right? I'm here for a reason. What am I neglecting? And as soon as I made that shift, I started to think about it from a place of service. Okay, I don't have to be perfect. I just have to show up and help. So what am I here to do? And in very practical terms, that's how I started every meeting, every conversation. So get the agenda, ask yourself, what role am I here to play? Where can I contribute? What questions do I have? What updates do I have? And just tune out the noise. The people around you have expertise that you don't have. That's a good thing because you can't be everything to everyone. It allows you to focus on what you do well. And so I would say from my perspective in terms of how I operate, that's how I operate. How can I be of greatest service? And how can I fill in the gaps with other people who are of service in different ways? And so I think speaking to the point of LinkedIn and how we promote ourselves, self-promotion has such an ick factor for so many of us. But if you think of it as, I'm not telling you this stuff so I can stroke my own ego. I'm telling you this stuff so you know how I can help you. You know how I can be of service. It makes it so much easier to speak with authenticity and ownership of what we know and do.
Yeah, I always say, like, no one expects the scope of your expertise to be everything. that would diminish the value of expertise, right? And so, like, having a really good sense of what it is that you do. And one question that I ask sometimes is, like, who do you like to help? Like, who is the population whose work you are helping to facilitate? And also, just as Kim said, that, the language can help people understand if you'll be of service to them. Like, they can also help you understand if you don't want to be of service to them. Like, something I heard in Kim's story was she didn't say she wanted to be an engineer, right? Like, she was like, I feel like I should go back to school, and that will help me catch up. And so I think it's always, when people talk about more school or more studying or expanding even the scope of their expertise, I only think that's really of service to ourselves if it, like, aligns. Like, if Kim wanted to be a software engineer, then more power to her, right? But if we're doing it because we think it's going to, like, be a silver bullet to the fact that we don't have a 20-year engineering behind us, then there's, like, something else there that we can kind of probably better contextualize. Rayshauna, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, I had to go to my own LinkedIn profile to remember what I wrote. This was definitely a hurdle for me because, just like I mentioned, that Capricorn Mars, it's sitting right across the table from that Cancer Mercury. And so, like, they be just care for you. How are you feeling? So I want to move like a soldier, but I want to make sure that I do so ethically. I want to make sure that I am, because it's not just about, like, the material condition of people's lives. It's also about how we feel. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about imposter syndrome. We'd be talking about our respective failures to execute to the level of our dreams. We will be having a very different conversation. And so on LinkedIn, I was like, I'm not going to lie to people and say I have a college degree when I don't, but I will say that, on every team, whether it was at MIT, Harvard, like no matter where I went, I was someone that was asking questions. I was someone that was digging. I was someone that held up a mirror to our internal processes. That's not always welcome. But one thing that I allowed myself to do was speak in my own language. On my LinkedIn profile, you'll see, a blurb that's pretty warm and personable. But I didn't do this recently, but up until maybe about a year or so ago, under every blurb, under a role, whether it's compensated or not, I include a section that says biggest lesson and crowning glory. Right? Like when I worked at an international education program that was based in Massachusetts, and I had 4 programs in Indiana, 1 in St. Louis, 1 in Kansas, and 2 in Denver, I made a point to reach out to any coworker or team member that had a program within 100 miles of my own in case it was in a state of disrepair, or at the very least, so we could pool our resources and figure out what was going on between our landscapes. That's not something that I was tasked with doing. It was born out of need, but it was a change I implemented because I believe in doing my work well, right? When I'm working at an economic mobility lab at Harvard and I sense that something's off, right? Because I've been in the workforce a few more years, at least a decade longer than a lot of the pre-doctoral fellows that are fresh out of undergrad and this is their first job. Yeah, I'm gonna ask to get baby pictures so that I can put them on the Slack and celebrate people, because it's a lot more difficult, in my opinion, to deny someone, a union if you've seen them as a child, right? It's a lot more difficult to get away with piecemeal conversations about values in our peer-reviewed research published by the National Bureau of Economic Research when I am facilitating conversations about our bedrock values over lunch, right? I just there are ways for us to be ourselves that can serve as such catalysts. And I found that the moments when people really sort of get stunned, it's when I remind them that, yeah, you're allowed to talk to your 5-year-old self. Like, yeah, you're allowed to speak your own language. You are the one providing value. And you're the one that has a monopoly on your own understanding of what you bring to a potential employer and team. That's what I want to share.
Yeah. One question that I like to ask is like, what are you most proud of? And I find that the framing of like, I'm proud of is not ever kind of setting you up to oversell yourself. And what I love most about asking this question of my clients is like, it's never just an achievement or an outcome, but it's very much about their sense of integrity. Like people are proud of times that they were able to contribute by offering, a different perspective or pushing for something that seemed unpopular or being really, offering a lot of care to the people around them in a challenging situation. So, you don't want to say I'm proud of like a half a dozen times in your LinkedIn profile, but it might be a really good prompt to start thinking like, what are the stories, or it might help like clarify what some of the values are too. There are really good questions in this panel. Like, I don't know why I spent so much time developing so many questions of my own. It's 1:45. So if the viewers have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat here. Let's see. I feel like we've answered some of these. So let me ask this. How do you think we can support each other as peers and colleagues? Like so much of this conversation is about like kind of walking the line between like owning what's ours while contributing to something that's just like by nature and a collective endeavor. And so what are the ways that we can do this as peers and coworkers and maybe friends? Like, do either of you have any thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot because I don't think that businesses recognize the impact of imposter syndrome on their efforts, right? If you consider that 70% of the population will experience imposter syndrome, and it's most common among high achievers, businesses are full of people with imposter syndrome. And when people don't feel comfortable that they're in the right role, they won't speak up and challenge the status quo, they won't share their ideas, what's the impact on creativity and innovation, right? So we all have an opportunity to support each other in creating an environment where we feel safer and more comfortable showing up and bringing what's different about us to the table as something special, as opposed to something that we should feel ashamed of. And so the things that I generally recommend are pay attention to settings where there isn't a lot of psychological safety or where there could be more. So most of the action happens in meetings. So what can you do as the average meeting participant to create a safer environment for the people around you? And that means making sure that people's voices are heard. If you're only hearing from a couple people, you can say, hey, time out. Let's see if other people have something that they would like to share, or make sure the meeting is structured in a way that doesn't just favor extroverts, but favors introverts as well and gives them time to process. People are getting interrupted or people are getting criticized. Hold on a second. Let's let her finish. Or, yeah, that was her idea. Something like that, right? Where we all sort of pitch in with each other and it's not one person's responsibility to defend themselves or to advocate for themselves in these settings. One thing I will say to managers is manage every single person on your team as if they all have imposter syndrome, because most of them do and no one will ever tell you. And what that means is be vulnerable. Make it okay to make mistakes. Don't set the standard as perfection. Talk about your own self-doubt. Talk about the imposter syndrome you've experienced along the way and offer help without being asked. Don't ask, do you need help? Because no one's going to say they do because they feel like they should already know it. Say, this is what helped me. These are the people you should talk to. These are the resources. You flood them with resources because they will never ask for them.
Those are really good tips, Kim. Thank you. Rayshauna, you look very thoughtful. Are you sitting with all of that?
Oh yeah, I'm chewing on it all. I'm going to offer one sappy thing. Honestly, whenever someone that I'm tethered to, professionally, personally, they don't even have to post about a specific accomplishment for me to randomly send them a very heartfelt voice note. And I get that this is not for everybody. But when I tell you that I have seen people become illuminated when I give them a very intentional, grateful, on point compliment, right? And I'm talking like, thank you so much for your contribution. And not just like you embody and exhibit this trait, but this is how you uniquely embody this this ability, whether it's a skill, whether it's an ability to facilitate in those groups. I don't think that people understand the effect that some of these meetings have on some of us. It's like, yeah, I would like to actually get to my point. Or, imagine a person that doesn't just want to shout everyone down. Some of us do like to listen before we speak. And it's not about us being deficient. Like, that's what our CEOs should be like, right? Imagine if we lived and worked in a working world, to get all weird and capitalist about it, but like, if we in these working landscapes, whatever, to get all academic about it, imagine if we actually value people that were thoughtful, discerning, people that can give a pure compliment without snark, without any intention of manipulation. Imagine if we lived and worked in a world where there wasn't value in moving fast and breaking things, and where people could, not to call out anyone specifically that wrote a book with that title, but I'm saying it's indicative of a cord, like a tether that I feel runs the length of our society. It's like we want to move fast, we want to break things, we don't want to be thoughtful, and then we're confused about why people don't perform. So yeah, when I tell you that I have a friend who's in seminary, I've sent her messages saying thank you so much for being part of a group of people that escorts people into and out of life. That is meaningful spiritual and cultural work. And that's not like, that sort of heartfelt gratitude is not something she's going to be able to read in a newspaper or get in a public school or get, in line at CVS. That's something that she gets from someone who's incredibly tethered to her, that understands the collection of capabilities that she has, and who's grateful about the choice they made to specifically contribute in a certain way, right? When you get a compliment like that, it pulls on something in you. And it turns down the volume, or at least in my case, it turned down the volume on imposter syndrome. When I was facilitating in Connecticut for the Obama Foundation, and someone walks up to me and says, hey, I used your framework in part to help me heal from being, someone who's undocumented, someone who was put through a conversion therapy program. These are things I don't experience, right? I'm that same descendant of enslaved folks and sharecroppers, right? My, haphazardly flopped together citizenship has like an Emancipation Proclamation and some Reconstruction Amendments but I have compassion for someone who's socially vulnerable in ways that I'm not, right? And if I've created something that helps them find language, helps them metaphorically see, unpack, and find some fitting healing for what they've gone through, how can I ever, like, if I never facilitate another imposter syndrome, conversation again, or participate in someone's amazing panel, I'm going to move in life knowing that I helped someone find their own language. And that's a balm. And honestly, and I'm not saying it's like this is going to be the case for everyone, but when someone comes to you and says, listen, you held up a flame or a candle in a very windy environment, and it gave me enough hope to keep pushing for just this much longer. That's something that changes you, because you then become an embodiment and a bearer of a certain inclination toward the world that other people need. I think that we all know what it's like to feel the inverse. Right? We've been feeling it for the last 20 months. I'll stop there.
Rayshauna, not to go off track here, but I think you have a lot. Where are your water placements? Tell me where the
right? Mercury in Cancer, Scorpio, Moon in Pluto, and Jupiter in Pisces.
Okay, good. I
want to pour water on the world.
Yes.
I'm tired of paying taxes. I just want to sleep. My Taurus rising. I just want to sleep. Can I sleep? I'm tired of fascism because it makes you work. I'm tired
of it makes you work. Yes, I know. Working on top of everything else in the last couple of years has been enough, I think, to push a lot of people over the edge. So I'm with you. I'm with you. Listen, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I feel like we need to have like follow-up conversations. Like maybe this needs to be less of a panel and more like a series or something, because there's just so much to unpack here. But thank you for everyone who watched. I want Kim and Rayshauna to share a little bit about their work, where you can find them before we wrap up. So I'll start with Kim and then Rayshauna. So Kim, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your work?
So if you go to yourcareersuccess.com/links, you can get some free resources on imposter syndrome. You'll also have a link to my podcast, The Imposter Syndrome Files. You can hear more conversations about this topic.
Excellent. And I'll ask both of you too after this to just link to where you want us to go so that we can make sure everyone sees it. Rayshauna, tell me, you have a special gift. So tell us about that and then tell us where they can find more about your work.
Yes, indeed. So I would like to offer everyone this very nifty imposter syndrome framework called the Heart Work in two different forms. There's a grid where you can fill out different sections if different pieces of the puzzle come to you at different times. And there's also a condensed version for if you just really want to get compact and meditate on a few things. I'm also offering everyone a digital version of my 72 card modus operandi deck for solo and group reflection. Unfortunately, because I didn't create an account, I can't add anything in the comments. So I'll provide the materials. But in that deck, there are questions like, what did you inherit that you refuse to pass on? What can rest offer you that productivity cannot? What inhibits innovation? Should anything inhibit it?
I'm just showing my cards while you talk right now.
And so the physical deck comes along with a magnifying lens card and a gray drawstring pouch with some other goodies usually. And so I wanted to offer the digital version to everyone. So I guess I'll follow up with email. I'm all over Al Gore's internet. My website is theidealog.info.
We're going to figure out how to link, if you're okay with it, Rayshauna, like if we can figure out how to link to them in the comments, is that cool?
Oh, yeah.
We might be able to like put them on a website or include it in an email. So we're going to try and figure that out. So hang with us. But otherwise, do head to Rayshauna's website and we'll make sure everyone puts their links in the website. I want to thank Kim. Thank you, Rayshauna, for taking time out of your day and joining me for this conversation. I can see from the comments that your insights were much appreciated. And we're so grateful for the resources, the Imposter Syndrome podcast that Kim hosts, and the questions and prompts. And I really recommend taking a look at Rayshauna's Imposter Syndrome framework. It's very powerful. I've seen her use it. So we'll make sure we link to those resources. So thank you very much for being here. And I hope everyone has a really fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.